Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. So tonight we're going to watch a movie called Barfly. No, tonight we're going to watch a movie called Barfly, of course. And we're so lucky to have. Is anybody here at Jules in the Wasteland for the first time? So wow, that's a lot of people. Thank you for coming. Are you guys also here at the AFS Cinema for the first time? All right, well, we do movies all the time. We do good movies all the time. We're kind of the cool place to see movies right now. So come and see movies here. We do a lot of movies. Pick up the calendar, sign up, get on our mailing list, all that kind of stuff. So what's going to happen tonight, those of you who know, but those of you who don't know, what's going to happen here tonight is Richard Linklater, AFS founder and artistic director, is going to come up and introduce the film. We're going to watch the film, and then afterwards we're going to pull up a couple of chairs, a couple of real heavy chairs, up on the stage, and then we're going to have a little discussion about what we just saw. And it's not just a Q&A, it's really just kind of discussion. So as you're watching the movie, you might have some questions, you might have some observations. Kind of put all those in your RAM so you can ask those questions. But right now, I'm going to get off the stage, and we're going to bring to the stage AFS Artistic Director Richard Linklater. Thanks, Lars. God, I'm so excited to see this movie. I haven't seen it since back in the day. How many of you fit that category? Saw this back in 87, and we're just so privileged here to watch a 35mm print. And, I think it's appropriate that of this 80 series that's been going on for a few years now, we're toward the end, 87, 8, and 9, that this is our third appearance by Mickey Rourke. I think it's, well, definitely we did Rumblefish, Hope Greenwich Village, and now this. Any other Mickeys? I don't know. But I assume everyone here, if we were doing the 100 film 80s, of course there would be Diner. I hope everyone's seen Diner, because he's so great in that. And then, Mickey had a good 80s. This was, it started to get a little more unhinged as it went along. But there's a lot of great films in there. Year of the Dragon, Angel Heart, 9.5 Weeks. But so tonight is for Mickey. Tonight is for Faye Dunaway. She's fantastic in this movie. It's just one of the great Faye Dunaway performances. The director of this film, Barfly, I have such high regard for him. He's a unique cat, in film history. He's from Switzerland, but he was a real French New Wave guy. He's younger than Truffaut Godard, but he's like half a generation younger than those guys. But he was there. He was producing movies. He's in a lot of those movies. Produced a lot of Rivette films. He acted in some movies. He's in Celine and Julie Godbouding. And one of my favorite, if you've seen this compilation called Six in Paris from, what is that, it's like 66. He acts in one of my favorite, the best of those films. Those things always turn into competitions. But the Jean Rouch film is one of the most brilliant short films you'll ever see. So get your hands on that. And Barfly, he's the main, he's an actor in it. He's really great. But tonight, he went on after this. He's a really sensitive, thoughtful, intelligent director. He did, after this, he did Reversal of Fortune, which is a just excellent film. And then he kept going in Hollywood, Single White Female and all that. But I just think his persistence in getting this film made is really special. And it's written of so eloquently in Charles Bukowski's book, Hollywood, which we'll talk about later. Lars, we were just talking before about what a great novel that is. But Schroeder, there's a really great scene. And he was dealing with, talk about 80s, Canon Films did this film, Golan and Globus. So everyone who's in the 80s, how many, like every week they open a new Canon film, right? If you don't know, it was like, they were kind of the king of the bees. They were to the 80s what AIP, Sam Arkoff, Roger Corman. It was just Chuck Norris movies and, Breaking 2. All the Death Wish movies, Electric Boogaloo. They would just take a trend and just run it into the ground. They were Golan and Globus. They were these cousins from Israel who they were really controversial. I remember them dedicating an entire, there was a 60 Minutes episode kind of investigating them once. That was kind of creepy. And then there was another episode, I think Siskel and Ebert devoted a whole episode to them, kind of criticizing, they're just deal makers and, but the bottom line, through sheer numbers, and they did have artistic ambitions. They had directed films, and they did have cinematic ambitions, and they ended up, bless them, through sheer numbers, supporting a lot of, they made this film, they made John Cassavetes' Love Streams, they made Godard's King Lear, they made Konchalovsky's Runaway Train and Shy People. What else? They really, somehow or another, in all their Cannes Film Festival deal making, they would just kind of throw down on someone. But they're all low budget, but films that needed the support. So, bless them. There's some really good films came out of them. But the funniest bit that Bukowski talks about is Schroeder. He was about to, I think they were pulling out. It's only like a $3 million budget, which back then, that's pretty good budget. But I think they were not going to do the film all of a sudden. So Barbet Schroeder shows up at their office with a skill saw, plugs it into the wall, gives his finger a shot of Novocaine, and then lays it on the table and starts the saw and says, if this movie, I'm cutting it off if you don't, fund this movie. And he's like, and they just start screaming like, no, stop. And he's like, no, I'm really gonna do it. And apparently that really happened. So that gets my, sometimes you have to just take it all the way. And so, we wouldn't be here tonight if he hadn't done that. Often I talk about where I came upon this movie. Yes, I saw this in '87. I saw it again several times back then. I haven't seen it in forever. That's why it's part of this series. But I want to talk about, and I think a lot of you here are fans, how I came to find Charles Bukowski. I haven't thought about him lately so much, but showing this film again really just reminds me how much I just love Bukowski in the '80s, like a lot of young men. But but I was like an assistant editor of our literary magazine at this college I was going to. This is like '81, and I read a poem from another literary magazine from Charles Bukowski. I'd never heard of him, and there was a little interview too. So I was like, this guy's really interesting. I just loved what he was talking about. He was kind of blunt but beautiful. Very, his poems very moving, and in his own blunt, kind of crazy way. And I was like, God, I want to. He was talking about this novel he had written, Post Office. So I was like, well, where to find it? Like the major booksellers don't have it. This is what kind of cult writer he was. No libraries had it. You just couldn't find it anywhere. I remember that's how hard it was back then. Couldn't just click on Amazon and get. You had to. I remember visiting some friends here in Austin, and there was this little bookstore in a neighborhood out of a house called Grok Books, and they had a shelf of Bukowski books. I was like, oh my God, I spent whatever money I had. I got Post Office, a couple books of poetry, and these short stories. Bukowski wrote about 6 or 7 novels, but he wrote a ton of short stories and a ton of poetry. I mean, literally hundreds of short stories. He had a regular column in the LA Free Press, I think, and he was really prolific. That's what I really admire about him. Apparently he got drunk every day and wrote every day. And he was such a late bloomer. And this movie is really depicting, he talks about it once you get to know him, his history. I think he published young. He was a writer. He was just a born writer. And in his early 20s, he had published a couple short stories. And then I don't think he was ready. And he said he just kept referring to it as this 10-year drunk. He went on a 10-year drunk, 25 to 35. And Wanda, the woman he meets here, Faye Dunaway, she's like 35 and he was 25. So it depicts a very real relationship, in his life. But he was just, just drinking those years. And, he didn't really, it's a fascinating career. He had odd jobs and all that, but he didn't really write full-time till he was 50. He had already published quite a bit of poetry and short stories. But this guy, John Martin at Black Sparrow Press, he started this press. It's really a beautiful story of of one publisher's commitment to a writer. He liked his work so much, he says, hey, do a novel, we can sell that. And he started a press, Black Sparrow Press, and that's what was on the shelf at Croc Books, which, punchline, when I moved back to Austin years later, Croc Books was gone. I was always kind of depressed. Like, oh, what happened? They didn't make it. It was such a cool bookstore. Well, they became book people, so yay. I didn't know that for about 15 or 20 years, so I felt better after that. But all those Bukowski books I bought. No, they had all kinds of great shit. What was I saying? Yeah, so John Martin says, okay, you need to quit the post office and all these other things and just write, dude. I'm going to give you, how much does it cost for you to live? How much money do you need a month? Bukowski says, I need $100 a month. He's living in kind of Skid Row, LA. So he says, John Martin he said, I make $400 a month, so I'm going to give you $100 a month, and we'll start this thing. And Bukowski immediately sat down and wrote, in 19 days, Post Office, that first book, and that came out around 1970, early 70s, but that built up its cult following, and he just kept doing it. And the great story here is he got more and more popular, and I think I'm of that wave, like this cult guy, but somewhere in the 80s, more people talking about him. He really took off in the 80s, which is, his 60s. And he just became more and more famous. You saw him, and then pretty soon Hollywood comes knocking. Barbet Schroeder had called him, I think somewhere in the early 80s, and said, hey, I want you to write a movie. And he wrote this. It's kind of, you'll see a lot of the material if you know his short stories. A lot of it's kind of in this movie, but it's an original Bukowski screenplay. And he spent those 6 years trying to get it made. And during those 6 years, if you really want to take a deep dive, while they were just kind of hung up, not getting financing for it, he did these 4 hours of videotapes. He just started taping them. So they're the Bukowski tapes. A lot of them are just hilarious. He's drinking, getting more progressively drunk, but you really just get to hang out with him. And so by the end of his life, John Martin, and he could have signed with any big publisher, but he stuck with Black Sparrow, a very loyal guy, and he was pretty frugal. But John Martin said he would go every 2 weeks. He would go to his house and hand him $10,000. The guy who lived on 100, and he could play the horses all day. He was living in San Pedro. Play the horses all day, and then write 4 hours every night. He was living this kind of great life. So I was a little jealous because, he was my, guy, cult guy. But now everybody liked Bukowski, but I was so happy for him. That I was like, okay, cool. And when your cult guy becomes big, international star. But it was just so cool for him. He makes a cameo in this movie. And I do have a quote here about about this movie. The movie is called Barfly, and it's about me, because that's what I was, a barfly. You ran errands for sadists and let the bartender beat you up because you were the bar clown. You filled people's days with your presence, and maybe you'd get a few free drinks now and then. The way I became a barfly was, I didn't like what I saw in the 9 to 5. I didn't want to become an ordinary working person, paying off the mortgage, looking at TV terrified. The bar was a hindrance to get out of the mainstream. The bar was a hiding place to get out of the mainstream. Meanwhile, I was a writer on the side, selling short stories to dirty magazines. I gave up the writing after a while and concentrated on drinking. I refused to accept the living death of acquiescence. So that's where we find him here. And Mickey Rourke is fantastic. Apparently he kind of wanted Sean Penn to play this part. Sean Penn's hovering around this film series. But he just stuck with Schroeder. He had such dedication. Again, a real loyal guy. I think he could have sold out, probably got a bigger budget. Penn and Hopper were maybe going to do it. But he just wanted to go with Schroeder, and he ended up really liking Mickey Rourke here. And he gives a very dedicated performance, as does Dunaway. They just go all in here. I'll be curious how it, it's big. He makes big choices, but I think he's kind of doing Bukowski, Hank, as he was calling. Everybody called Bukowski Hank. Henry Chernowski, his alter ego. So I don't even remember much what happens in this movie. It's at a bar, they drink a lot, there's fighting. some agent comes and tries to publish him or something, give him some money, he has an affair with her. I don't know. But it's fun. So we'll be around after to talk about this movie. And yeah, let's just enjoy Barfly. All right, thanks. Who's going to say the line? Round of drinks. That's where that came from.
Well, my
For the last 30 years, you've been hearing that one. It's a classic.
So, Rourke, Dunaway, Stallone.
So good. You know, in my mind, it's so funny what, you know, almost 30 years does. You know, because in my mind, it was like, I loved this movie, but I thought, well, maybe he's a little big. It's the same thing I thought of Hope of Greenwich Village watching it. I was like, in your mind, it's these bigger performances. I remember maybe thinking, maybe a little over the top, but then watching it tonight, I said, no, it's such nuance. I don't think it seems kind of perfect.
It's interesting because in Hollywood, the Bukowski book / autobiography about this, he says how much he liked Mickey Rourke's performance, but he also sort of gave him a lot of advice, which was like, no, you're too New York. You're a California boy.
Right.
Like, you can't be so New York and aggressive. You have to kind of
New York streets.
Yeah.
Well, Bukowski was so like LA, you know. He just never wanted to leave, you know. That's but yeah, and I remember in the book, you guys have to read it if you haven't read Hollywood. It's a great book of the making of a movie, but it's a total Bukowski book, but then it's just about the film industry and his view of it. But I remember there was this rivalry kind of between Rourke and Sean Penn. You know, because Sean Penn wanted to do it, but he was great friends with Bukowski to the very end. You know, he was always over there, and they were like supposedly great friends. But he just, and I can't. Sean Penn would have been almost too young or something. Mickey Rourke, he's just so perfect. But yeah, I'm glad he liked him. I think because he wasn't technically his first choice. Apparently, it was Sean Penn, but I think it's a blessing. But yeah, I remember Mickey Rourke says, yeah, Sean Penn's from Malibu, I'm from the streets. You know, he was always like, I've got more street cred. But yeah, he is more East Coast, I guess.
So looking at the movie, it's like there is so much kind of the romance of the dive bar, which I don't know if many people had really, many arty people had considered that so much before this movie.
I wonder. I mean, you know, it's in theater, of course. But I don't know, movies, you know, the guts to just make the whole movie in these bars. And those are real barflies, you know, those people in there, those aren't actors. A high percentage of them. God, you look at it now and think, is one of them even still alive? With the kind of stuff.
No way.
Let's have a barfly reunion. There'll be like 3 people. Rourke, Faye Dunaway. Oh,
how many oxygen tents?
Yeah. Gosh, it's good to see him. Jack Nance, he shows up in colors. You know, he's in all those movies. But yeah, God, seriously, and it'll look great too. I kind of thought in my mind too. It's like, well, was it overlit? A little too, you know, could it have been grittier? I thought maybe it was too pretty in a way. But no, now I judge it. What Schroeder and Robbie Mueller, you know, who's one of the great DPs. He did all those Benders, you know, movies, and he was starting to do more American movies at this time. And no, I find it's great. Neon, very realistic. You know, that's LA. That's, you know, those neighborhoods. That's those bars. So,
is there really a cornfield?
I haven't seen it. I want to go. Like, I don't think I'd ever really been to LA when I saw this, or maybe once or something. But I know it a lot better now, unfortunately. And I kind of want to do a Barfly tour.
Oh yeah.
You know, I saw a lot of places I recognize, but I kind of want to hit some of those locations. I'm sure I doubt those exact bars are there, but so many of the apartment buildings, those probably are. This isn't a Q&A or anything, just throw in a comment. We're just talking.
Somebody had a contribution?
I saw a hand go up.
Yeah. Right over here.
Yeah, let's organize that now. Yeah, the van leaves. Yeah, Saturday morning. We'll head over there. LA is great for that, though. As miserable a place as it can be, it has a. Did you ever do the Graveline tour? Have you heard that? You go around in a hearse, and look at all the places where everyone died. It's pretty. It was the morbidity tour of LA, but it was pretty great. You know, it's like here's they're playing a tape on the stereo system. It'd be like, well, here you'd hear a Janis Joplin song by some hotel. That's where in 1970 Janis Joplin dropped dead. That's where Sal Mineo got stabbed on Santa Monica. It's like, ooh, over here's where the Charles Manson house, it's not longer there, but it would be right there. He just ends up at a graveyard. It's kind of, I don't know, it gives you a deeper appreciation.
Sort of the Hollywood Babylon tour.
Yeah, pretty fun. But they should have a Barfly tour. That's what I'm
totally. Absolutely.
Who was Bukowski's, who was the cameo? Yeah. I didn't recognize him.
Oh, he's when he first meets Wanda. Should have pointed it out, or we should have all applauded or something. He's just sitting there at the bar when he first meets Wanda. She's sitting at the bar. He's the guy in the middle. Just, I don't know. It's not like he had a line or anything.
The guy with the enormous face.
Yeah, you can't really miss him once you see that.
And by the way,
Nice.
you'll see a lot of that. You can go on YouTube and see the Bukowski tapes, the stuff that Barbet Schroeder filmed, and it's amazing. It's just him sitting there, and his voice isn't what you expect it to be.
No, he's got that high pitch, It's like, Rourke was doing a pretty good job hitting that kind of higher note. But those tapes are fascinating because he's a real raconteur. Even though he says he doesn't want to be around people, he just tells stories and has such a great way. Also, Ron Mann's documentary Poetry in Motion, he kind of is the anti-narrator throughout that. I think anyone who ever met him just said, I just want to hang out with him and hear him talk and put him on film. And he was one of those guys who you were just kind of attracted to. People came from all over the world to his doorstep. So much of his writing is about pests. People bugging him. He wanted to be left alone, but he attracted everyone. So.
Right over here.
Yeah. If you remade this movie in Austin, what locations would you pick?
What two Austin bars would we pick for? Barfly. Yeah, that's Camino on 6. I like Old Hole in the Wall. Yeah, Deep Eddy. There's a lot. There's a lot. Carousel. We just don't have those. I don't know that. Maybe I'm out of it, but I just don't see that. I mean, LA, that culture, just the day drinking culture of people, and just rows of bars. In so many of certain neighborhoods, but it's more prevalent. I don't know. I don't really.
I like how he takes
Austin's
$3.
not really like that.
He's like $3. He's like, that'll buy you a lot of drinks.
It went pretty far. Yeah. I know. A whole bar for and a story for $500. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he was selling those stories for $50 and stuff. So.
That would be more realistic.
The original Bukowski screenplay, how similar is the actual? Are you familiar with it?
Has anyone read it? It'd be one worth getting your hands on because, I wonder. I think they had such a reverence for him and his writing, but that doesn't always mean. I think Mickey Rourke, they were free to try things. I think he said he would do something different, but I don't know if that was changing the words a lot. That's an interesting question. I'd be really curious how to the word it is.
I know that Faye Dunaway insisted that there was that scene where they talked about her legs. That's true. Like
She says,
she
if I'm
wanted
doing
that
this,
scene,
you're
she's
going to
like-
talk about my legs.
Yeah, that was a necessary thing.
I'm glad she did.
It's a good scene.
She's a goddess. I love her.
Isn't it great in that scene where we go, oh, who is she? She looks like a goddess in exile or whatever.
What did he say?
Goddess in distress.
In distress. Yeah. Oh,
He says, why is nobody talking to her? Because she's crazy. And he's just like, it's just like the best thing you could have said to him. He's like, oh my, it's my lucky day.
What a high percentage of perfect lines coming out of his mouth. Just perfect little, just the poetry and the wit.
And the things
just
that are
continuous, and it's so just understated, and
and they're not structured like punchlines or anything. They're just so unexpected sometimes so wise.
Just kind of flowing. Yeah. That's who he was. That's how his stories read. You read them.
What other great bar movies? Like I think of Fat City, from the 70s, and sort of a bar boxing or
I don't even know that. Yes. Did everyone see? Well, more recently in the last year, did you guys see Louis C.K.'s TV? Horace and Pete. It's a multi-hour thing that all takes place in. It's a 10-part TV thing Louis C.K. did. Just kind of a. I think you can get it online. Is it on Netflix now? Yeah, Hulu now has it, but he just did it like an indie film. He didn't tell anyone. He's like, "Here's a TV series I did, 10 parts." It was like, whoa. It's Louis C.K. and Steve Buscemi, Treat Lounge, and a bunch of great people coming and going. It's fantastic. It's clearly influenced by this, but it's more like a TV show. Alan Alda. There's been a bar in Brooklyn that's been there 100 years, Horace and Pete's, and these two guys have inherited it. But it's wonderful. I would really highly recommend it. Some people I know just put this film and that in the same category of like, hell no, I'm not watching that. That's depressing. And even at the time this came out, I mean, that's what's so damn great and ballsy about this movie. I mean, I can't help but look at Mickey Rourke with blood on him and those whiskers and walking like that. At this very moment, Tom Cruise is like, Top Gun, and the whole culture was so like yuppie, and could you get farther away? So many films I've programmed here are just the counter programming to the prevailing ugly winds of the 80s. This is the underground, what was really going on the street level that they were trying to forget. So I love this for that, but yeah, it's just gutsy. It's really, you gotta admire that. He's not, just love him for that.
Nothing could have been less cool than like Skid Row, like rot gut drinking bums.
Yeah,
it wasn't
just
like it was
not
even like,
attractive. In reviews, I remember one review, it starts with, the first 4 letters say it all. Barfly. That was his review.
Yeah, that critic's been forgotten now, and we're watching this movie still. I see a hand right here, back here.
But it repulsed people.
I want to see 2 respectable film enthusiasts talk about Frank Stallone. Can you help me out?
Well, he's not as good a fighter as his brother, I guess.
You just know that Golan and Globus were at the Cannes film market going, yeah, we got a new movie. It's Dunaway, Stallone.
We got Stallone. Right. Yeah. Roar, Stallone. And Mickey gets his boxing skills. He's a boxer. He quit acting to go back to the ring. He grew up a boxer. Then he took some time off. People thought he was crazy. That's what you have to kind of give it up for him. He just did his own thing. He's like, I'm sick of acting. I'm going to go back to the ring. And he did. But I don't know, Frank Stallone, to your question, hey, he's good. Did he do much? Do I know him from any other movies?
Yeah, he did.
I don't really know.
There was a whole thing.
What's the Frank Stallone filmography?
Zach,
come on.
There's a whole bunch of Frank Stallone films, but
yeah, I mean,
they would come in boxes and it would say like Stallone in big letters, and you'd have to like really get your magnifying glass out to see the word Frank.
But he's good. He's such a good antagonist. I don't know. I think he's good.
Well, that ends the Frank Stallone portion of our conversation.
To be continued.
I see a hand back here.
Actually, it doesn't quite end it, because I was going to say Frank Stallone shows up in a lot of like the 1970s Stallone films, like doing soundtrack work.
Yeah.
He was the guy with the "Take Me Back" doo-wop song in Rocky, but that's not my point.
So he's doing a lot of music.
He's a force to be reckoned with.
He's a brother.
There's so much I want to say, or I don't know where to start with this film, and I'm going to keep it brief. But there's this weird thing going on with Mickey Rourke in the 1980s, where when he's not appearing in period pieces, where he's this, in this noirish 40s, 50s universe, he seems to be channeling it. And I think Barfly is an interesting example of that, because you could argue, yeah, it's clearly set in the 80s of its production, but then again, there's all this stuff going on that makes it sort of be in this sort of timeless Americana
Yeah, completely.
universe or something. And I don't know if you guys want to talk
And you kind of feel like nothing changes in that world. Like what the price of drinks incrementally goes up, but that's all. You know, for all we know, those people are wearing clothes from. I mean, it feels like it could be the 40s or 50s or. Yeah, just like I think
And that's sort of like.
that makes it really timeless.
It does, and it's sort of like the way Mickey Rourke built his iconic image in the 1980s, where he was this sort of ghost of cinema past.
Yeah, well, he was the guy.
All these
I mean,
actors from the 1950s.
yeah, make no mistake, he was the new Brando. I mean, he was the guy. You know, Mickey Rourke and Eric Roberts, and just like they were the new great American actors. And it's true. I mean, look at that. You know, I don't know. I think he's fantastic.
So a couple years ago, we showed Pope of Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
Some of you may not have seen that. It's really amazing.
Really
if you haven't
holds
seen it,
up.
you got to go see it.
You know, this movie's so timeless in that way, and it's kind of jarring when he makes when he's all bloody and they're looking for the body. He goes, "What a, Leon Spinks." So if you don't know, he was a kind of a fallen heavyweight champ, but there's so little pop culture reference, you know.
Robert's AIDS too, which
Yeah, you got the AIDS, and you go, "Oh yeah, that's right, that was a new thing."
Village, it's like you watch that and it's like, is this the 50s, the 60s, the
Yeah.
70s, the 80s?
It's kind of great.
It's sort of, anyway.
Timeless Mickey Rourke.
I think whenever I say AIDS anymore, I'm just going to say the AIDS. Would that be a funny thing to say?
That's what he
or would
said.
that
You
just
got
be...
the AIDS. What is it?
Maybe I won't say that. I don't know.
Yeah, that was like.
Funny. Right over here.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite films. When it first came out, I was working at I Love Video when they had one on Burnett Road, and I used to play it religiously on the speakers because I liked the soundtrack and I liked the dialogue. It's great dialogue. But later on, I was a manager at Waterloo Video, and I noticed on the spine of the VHS box, this is way before DVDs, that it said comedy. And so I thought, that's interesting that the studio considers it a comedy. And I thought, that's kind of crazy. But then when I thought about it, I thought, I laugh a lot when I watch this movie, and it gives me a lot of joy. I'm smiling.
Yeah.
Gives me a lust for life. Makes me want to drink and smoke. But I thought, is it a comedy or is it a drama? So I put it in the comedy section, just kind of fuck with people a little bit. And people would get real heated about it and say, hey, this is not a comedy. It's about alcoholism. It's serious business. So it's like, have you ever seen Chase the Clown?
Yeah.
But and overall, funny. People laughed a
Let's
lot
vote.
here. So is it a comedy? Or not?
All right, this is really important stuff, guys.
Okay, how many say drama? Raise the hand. How many say comedy? I don't know. Yeah, comedy. Well, what else is it? Because it's not very dramatic. What the hell happens?
Why were we laughing?
Because it's consistently really fucking funny. It's a comedy. Right?
That's the thing that Tarantino
And it's
said.
not about alcoholism. It's a portrait of alcoholism, but I don't see anyone saying, you got to go to AA. Let's clean up. Let's do. I mean, she talks a little bit about it, and but these are drinkers. They're not. There's an unrepentance. There's something kind of pure.
It's in the comedy section.
Pure about it.
Well, that's what Tarantino did. He went into like Cinephile Video or wherever, and he went there and he said, "Where's Pulp Fiction?" And it was an action, and he was like, "No, you got to put it in comedy." It was like important
Yeah,
that Pulp Fiction be
yeah.
in comedy.
Exactly.
Because it's
action.
constructed that way.
It's like no, it's comedy. Bukowski's consistently. He's always funny. I mean, he's very. There's a lot of things that, but I always think he's pretty damn funny.
Are there ever any movies that you see that like people don't generally think of as a comedy, and you were just always like, no, I always assumed that was a comedy, and then people
It's hilarious.
like Bergman movies or something. You're like, no, Cries and Whispers is hysterical.
I always treated The Exorcist like a comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at it from a comedic angle, it's really funny.
Eyes Wide Shut. That's a good example. Yeah.
That's anxiety. Right, or anxious tone. But
It
some
ends on
movies
a
you can
laugh.
find them. Yeah. I'm trying to think. That's a nice. Yeah.
When Force
Subgenre.
Majeure, the movie Force Majeure came out a few years ago. I remember telling somebody out of town, so you should really go see Force Majeure, and he watched it and he was like, yeah, that's a really deeply serious film. I was like, no, it's hysterical.
It's a comedy. You're missing the point. Yeah. And likewise, is King of Comedy a comedy?
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's funny, but so like awkwardly funny. You can't. Yeah, the laughs are so cringy. I don't think it's a comedy.
This is
I
why
don't know
people.
what it is, but it's not like a comedy.
This is why people were so confused in the 80s. They would go like, oh, king of comedy, take my money, I'm gonna laugh. Oh, guys, I'm gonna laugh so hard. And then like, oh, it's this movie about alcoholism. Okay, yeah, take my money, I'm gonna cry.
It
It was a
funny.
mixed up time.
Yeah, I mean, what's more depressing than a comedy that's not very funny?
I see a hand back here.
The discussion been going on, and just the fact that the relationship seems to be centered around the bottle. I'm trying to figure out how many other films have been based around a romantic relationship that both parties are heavily invested in drinking. And what came to mind, and people I probably know way better than I do, was just The Hustler. And except again, that's certainly not a comedy, but I was just wondering if there are any other kind of shared interests.
Do they have to be comedies? Because they're
Basically, I was saying, I almost feel like this was in some regards harkening back to that.
yeah, to like
There was a movie with Jack Nicholson called Ironweed or something like that with Meryl Streep.
Yeah, yeah.
It was similar to that. They both relationship in a bar.
But that wasn't funny though,
No,
was it? Yeah, that wasn't funny. That's like Days of Wine and Roses is not funny, but it's great.
Somebody mentioned Fat City with Stacy Keach and Susan
Yeah.
Terrell.
Oh gosh. Yeah, there's a lot of bar in that, but not. I think this has the highest percentage of like film in bar. They're really. I mean, they're at the houses where they live a bunch, but the bar percentage is pretty damn high. Other one, I think Eagle Pinnell's, movie Last Night at the Alamo. The Alamo's a bar. The whole thing's in that practically. It's practically a one location movie. So
You think Schroeder saw
Iceman
that
come
before he made this?
I
Eagle
wonder.
Pinnell's movie?
I don't know. Maybe not, actually. I'd like to think so, but it didn't get that wide. Well, you know what? That's a good question. He probably did. It played around a little bit.
Played in New York film.
Played in New York, but was he there then? He got splotchy distribution. Played a week in places. Maybe. No, that's a funny movie. Well, a really drunk movie too. Real portrait. Talk about portrait of alcohol. Yeah. Well, I don't think alcohol makes a good writer, but it kind of feeds into that, doesn't it? The cliche, the drunk writer. So, but he's the one who won the lottery, the one out of 1 million drunks who actually can write.
Why was Faulkner a drunk? Why have so many great writers been drunks? It's probably not that the alcohol makes them great writers. It's probably that they need to drink for the same reasons that they're great. They're so observant. Maybe they need to deaden their.
Probably be any, artist, but yeah. I've known aspiring writers who are aspiring alcoholics too, but I wouldn't suggest it. You usually just kind of end up an alcoholic.
I would generally say that if you're a drunk, you should probably stop being a drunk. Just generally,
Yeah.
romantic as it looks on film, it's like there's resources. Go out and get the resources. Don't become a drunk.
Yeah.
But it sure looks cool for an hour and a half on the
fun.
movie screen.
Yeah, it's not. It's not.
So speaking of great movies on the movie screen, next week we've got Boyfriends and Girlfriends.
Yeah, we jump over to France and have a good Eric Romer film from the late 80s. Completely charming, fun, kind of brilliant Eric Romer film. Love it. So, is that people seen that movie? Anyone seen Boyfriends and Girlfriends?
Yeah.
It was
Very
just
few
one.
people.
It's he was on a roll. Kind of, there was an Eric Romer film practically every year, but that one, he has a mind of a. Those are very meticulous. They seem like you're just kind of hanging out with these young people, but there's a certain structure and meticulousness that I kind of want to watch again and think about, because I always think of him as almost there's a mathematical quality to it, that a certain symmetrical beauty to what he's doing. So, but it's fun and it's just kind of beautiful. As I remember, we showed part of the '80s series. We did Summer in another section. So he's one of the few directors who gets 2 films represented. But he had a good '80s. many others. So, all right. Anything else? Anybody just can't leave without any other?
Yes, contribution. Anybody get the contribution of the night?
Yeah,
I see
that'd be
somebody
good.
wildly gesticulating in the back.
Yeah, hey y'all. I was just wondering y'all's take on the end of the film. You know, we've had two fights pictured. He's lost one, he's won one. This is the rubber match, but clearly it doesn't matter much who wins because I guess like you're saying, not a whole lot changes in this universe that the film takes place in. It's like a remarkably sustainable little like microcosm they got going on, and like I was anticipating, you know, alcoholic meets an alcoholic, they descend into alcoholic tragedy or something like that, but it's it looks like it's remarkably funny. And
It's beautiful.
they're like remarkably solid, and I guess yeah, to the point about genre, I was just setting itself up to be kind of a downer of a film, but I don't know, he just has such a solid sense of self that
Yeah.
it's a winner.
Yeah, as she said, he has this nobility about him. He's like, really? Yeah. I mean, he kind of carries himself in this elevated way, and I think he did, even when he was, because, you know, he was a writer. He was successful young. He just was taking some time off or writing less during this little 10-year drunk of his. But, yeah, I think he probably always thought of himself as an observant, you know, outsider to it or something. I don't know. I don't think he was there intentionally getting material, but that's just where he felt comfortable his whole life, apparently.
Well, the fight starting and ending the film and being in the middle of the film.
It's a great little bookend.
Yeah.
You know, it's a great little.
One of the few things that feels sort of script writer-ish about it is
Yeah,
that there is sort of a rhyming structure.
It's the one thing that it looked like they imposed the structure.
Mhm.
Other than that, it just kind of flows. Like, it's hard to remember this movie, like what comes after what. You know, but I think that's a high tribute.
Just like High Hopes, right?
Yeah, just kind of one thing to the next, and it's never boring. You know, it just kind of, it's just enough humor and levity, and you know, just enough going on, just enough moving around, just enough, oh, money here, you know, whatever's going on. So I don't know, it's beautifully minimal in that way.
Well,
And did you guys like High Hopes last week? I hated to miss it, but yeah.
you were super bummed to miss that. That wasn't just like a thing where it's like, oh, you know, you have to miss it. You were really bummed.
Oh yeah, well I wanted to see it on the big screen.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, this is very self-serving. I want to see these movies again. And just, yeah, you know, think about Mike Leigh. Did it, it's early Mike Leigh, even though he's an older guy at that point. You know, he had a big career before that. But I just kind of like the way he works and what he's, have you ever seen Happy Go Lucky? Do you guys know that one? I have a really funny story because I worked with Eddie Marzan, who played kind of remember the driving instructor. So, and this is, I'll tell one Mike Leigh story just because this is very indicative of how he works. It's very like compartmentalized. The actors don't, it's the Manhattan Project. No one knows what the other is doing. He will often put actors, the camera will be rolling when they've been working 6 months and they've never met. And he'll put them in a scene together with all the background just to kind of capture a real moment. He'll do that. Secrets and Lies is a big moment. When she finally meets her biological mother. It's a woman looking for, when her daughter finds her, there's this just beautiful, like 7-minute, one-take scene. And those are the actors meeting for the first time. Same in Naked, there's some of that. Happy Go Lucky, not so much of that, because they're interacting a lot. I'm talking about Sally Hawkins' character and Eddie Marzan's character. But Eddie told me he just worked with Mike alone, building up like conspiracy theories, and said he was actually, this is 10 years ago, but he was actually getting a lot of that, or stuff from like Alex Jones. And just kind of riffing on that, but he saw his characters very intense. Like he didn't know, because he didn't even know maybe at the end it might end in violence, and he thought he was playing like this was his Travis Bickle, you know, Taxi Driver. He was just dialed in and intense. And then he said he didn't know until he watched it with an audience at the premiere that it was everyone was laughing at him. You and it was a comedy. From an actor's point of view, that's hilarious. So the director could go 6 months and not tell you, oh, that's funny, let's put that in. Like, no, that's good. And to know secretly he's laughing at you for 6 months. And Eddie thought it was brilliant. I mean, he's a brilliant actor, but he didn't pick up on it, and Mike never told him. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, he didn't know he was funny.
Have you done that? Have you ever had like a scene where like an actor you wanted to play it as funny, but you didn't let the actor in?
Not really, no. I'm trying to like craft the humor and stuff because, I mean, yeah, often I know it's going to be more funny than they think, but never so far as they don't even, we're not in the arena of comedy.
Right.
Yeah. That to me is otherworldly and says a lot about Mike Leigh's patience and the way he puts together movies. You know, completely unique, and he's only perfected that. High Hopes is a really rudimentary first, stab at that. He gets nothing but better, and I'm really excited. Mike Leigh's got his biggest film yet. He's doing right now. I think Amazon Studios has funded him. He's doing a big 19th century historical film about a labor rebellion and a kind of oppressive government reaction. They killed a bunch of people. Good old British government. 19th century Peterloo, I think it's called. So, you had something?
Yeah, Lawrence's question made me think of the opposite question. Have you ever had an actor completely, you're thinking all drama, and he comes in or she and plays it, and you're like, wow, okay, we're going comedy with this. Just their choice completely changes your direction on a performance?
Not on something I'm doing, because I'm usually the one trying to make things funny out of.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm all for that, typically.
Like Matthew McConaughey, you're
But,
thinking all drama, dazed and confused, and he goes.
No, comedy. So no, I haven't really experienced that. But that's pretty far off the, that's, I think, before you're cast and you're making the movie, I think that's something a director and actor should have, be on the same page with. Put it like that. That's a train wreck. That's gonna be not a good working relationship. But that happens all the time. But it's usually a studio, and then the director and the film have a different view, and that's you need to avoid as a filmmaker, to be making a different film than they think you're making a drama and you're making a comedy, or worse for them, they think they're making a comedy and you're making it too damn serious. So that's always a disaster, because they're gonna want you to recut and reshoot and whatever. That's a bad. So you got to be really upfront, I think, about what the hell you're trying to do. So just a little bit of advice.
I think that's what happened on Deuce Bigelow, European Gigolo. They were like, this would be real serious, and the actors came in.
Yeah. We got Ishtar coming up in a few weeks.
Which has gotten a lot funnier than people didn't get it at the time when Ishtar came out, but it's really funny.
I thought it was pretty hilarious then, but I was in a pretty much empty theater, so a couple other people thought.
Well, we'll be reliving that experience in a couple of weeks, perhaps.
Yeah. No, come to Ishtar. Let's give it up to Elaine May.
Speaking of theaters that also won't be empty, Last Flight Flying opens in this theater tomorrow.
Yeah. If you're gonna see it, come see it here at AFS.
Yeah, why would you go to some other theater to see Last Flight Flying? You would go and support Richard Linklater's movie in Richard Linklater's theater.
In our own film society, love them, yeah.
So please come see it, and if you've already seen it, then tell all your friends how great it is, and tell them to come see it here.
Yeah, we want our commercial offerings to do well here, so we can get more films. So, yeah.
That's kind of a look behind the curtain.
Bring people. Yeah, we want to show those kind of films. So,
I gotta say, Rick, it seems a little gauche to say this as we're filing out and wrapping up our evening, but we should also let people know that happy hour is taking place in the lobby after this.
Oh, always, and yeah, be a member if you're not, and everyone else. Thanks Amazon Studios, they give us a grant. So I think we've covered all the bases.
And while it sounds a little bit like we're really like trying to like get all the money we can, we are, because we spend it on artist services, we spend it on stuff like this. So
Hey,
yes.
it's the film study. We're a nonprofit. We always got our hand out. But hey, we deliver the goods, man. That was a great print tonight. Very special. So thank you guys.
Thanks everybody.
For being here.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah.